Have you ever wondered what happens when family ties are just a tool for manipulation? My story does not begin with a fiery argument, but with a heavy iron gate slamming shut in my face on a freezing California coastline. That cold rejection was their opening move in a deadly game over $23,000 that threatened my career and freedom. They fired the very first shot, entirely unaware that I held the final bullet. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Caroline Robertson. I am 34 years old, working as the Emergency Logistics Director for a massive private maritime corporation called Ethelgard Global. My career involves managing high-stakes crises, coordinating supply chains, and bringing order to absolute chaos. I had just survived a brutal 12-hour flight straight from an offshore drilling rig in the freezing Atlantic Ocean. Instead of going home to rest, I drove directly up the coastal highway to a breathtaking cliffside mansion in Carmel by the Sea, California. Resting securely on my passenger seat was a padded mahogany box containing a rare antique ceramic set. It was a wedding gift for my younger sister, Chloe. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and ocean salt as I pulled up to the grand entrance. The estate was a monument to extreme wealth, enclosed by towering wrought iron security gates. I stepped out of my car, expecting the guards to open the gates for me. Instead, I found my path physically blocked by my own mother, Vivian. She stood on the other side of the heavy iron bars, draped in a custom-fitted emerald silk dress that fluttered in the biting sea wind. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest in an impenetrable, defensive posture I had known since childhood. She did not smile or reach out to hug me. She glared at me with cold, calculating eyes. "You cannot come in, Caroline," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper so the valet attendants would not hear. "Chloe's new in-laws belong to the political elite. Julian's family demands a completely flawless event. We cannot have a single blemish today." I stood there on the cold asphalt, my hands still gripping my car keys, trying to process her words. "I am her sister. I flew 12 hours to be here for her." Vivian scoffed, her manicured fingers tightening against her silk sleeves. "Look at you. Your job is far too rough. You always look like a mechanic who just crawled out of an engine room. You do not fit in with these people. Your presence here would completely ruin the family picture. We cannot risk embarrassing Julian's parents." Through the ornate glass panels of the courtyard doors, I could see the reception area. The lawn was an ocean of white roses and crystal champagne towers, and there was Chloe. She looked ethereal in a sprawling, luxurious wedding gown, standing next to Julian, laughing brightly. For a brief second, Chloe turned her head, her eyes locked onto mine through the glass. The laughter vanished from her lips, but instead of walking to the gate to demand they let me in, she immediately snapped her head back around, lifted her champagne flute, and pretended to laugh at a bridesmaid's joke. She acted as if I did not exist. Before I could even process the betrayal, my father, Arthur, stepped out from behind a stone pillar. He looked immaculate in a tailored tuxedo, a stark contrast to the deep exhaustion buried in my bones. He marched up to the gate, reached through the iron bars, and shoved a cheap bank card against my chest. "There is $50 on this," Arthur muttered, refusing to look me in the eye. "Do us all a favor. Drive down to town, find a quiet cafe, and just watch the wedding live stream on your phone. Do not make a scene." I looked down at the plastic card resting in my calloused hand. I did not cry. I did not scream or beg them to let me in. Instead, a profound, paralyzing stillness washed over me. The wind howling off the Pacific Ocean felt like ice against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the absolute freezing numbness settling deep inside my chest. Without a single word, I flicked my wrist. The $50 card spun through the air and landed with a quiet splash into the decorative stone fountain outside the gates. I turned around, walked back to my car, and started the engine. As I drove away into the cold fog, leaving the music and the laughter behind, a dark realization took root in my mind. I had sacrificed my entire youth to provide for people who did not even view me as a human being. To them, I was just a wallet and an embarrassment. But as those iron gates disappeared in my rearview mirror, I knew one thing for certain: the time for giving was over. 3 weeks had passed since the coastal fog swallowed those iron gates. I had buried myself in the relentless chaos of my work, preferring the predictable disasters of the global maritime industry over the unpredictable cruelty of my own bloodline. I was sitting in the dark, humming glow of my command center, frantically routing containment vessels for a simulated crude oil spill off the Gulf Coast. The pressure was immense, the air in the room thick with the urgency of logistics and disaster mitigation. Then, a high-priority alert flashed across my secondary monitor, cutting through the simulation data. It was an urgent, red-flagged email from the legal department of Ethelgard Global. My heart seized in my chest. Corporate attorneys did not contact operational directors directly unless the sky was falling. I clicked open the attached document. As my eyes scanned the harsh legal jargon, the temperature in my office seemed to plummet, leaving me shivering despite the heavy blazer I wore. A luxury 5-star resort was threatening immediate litigation against my employer for a severely overdue invoice. The total due was $23,000. The billing description typed boldly across the header read, Corporate Partner Appreciation Event. The guarantor listed at the very bottom of the binding contract was me. I leaned closer to the high-resolution screen, my breath turning frighteningly shallow. Stamped at the bottom of the digital contract was my exact electronic signature, sitting perfectly alongside my official departmental seal. My mind raced, desperately piecing together the timeline. The date of the so-called corporate event perfectly matched the date of Chloe's wedding reception. Panic, sharp and metallic, tasted like blood in my mouth. The walls of the command center suddenly felt like they were pressing inward, crushing the oxygen out of my lungs. This was not a simple unpaid tab or a civil dispute. This was identity theft. This was the unauthorized use of corporate resources. This was federal fraud. My desk phone vibrated violently against the wood. The caller ID flashed Vivian's name. I picked up the heavy receiver before I could even force a greeting. Her voice cut through the line, entirely devoid of maternal warmth. You received the invoice from the resort, right? She demanded. There was no hello. There was no apology for abandoning me at the gates of Carmel. There was only a cold, calculated expectation. You forged my signature on a corporate contract, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously low register. You used my company credentials to foot the bill for Chloe's reception. Vivian sighed heavily, expertly slipping into her role as the inconvenienced victim. Do not be so dramatic, Caroline. It is just a piece of paper. Just tell your accounting department it was a welfare fund expense, or write it off as a client dinner. Ethelgard makes billions of dollars a year. They will not even notice a measly $23,000. Julian's family cannot find out we were short on cash for the venue. Are you really going to ruin your younger sister's marriage over some petty corporate policy? Petty corporate policy, the sheer audacity of her words paralyzed me. While still on the line, I quickly pulled up my secondary terminal and ran a background trace on the resort's payment ledger. My crisis management training kicked in instinctively. You always follow the money trail. What I uncovered in those frantic seconds made my stomach churn with disgust. The venue had initially been paid in full. Julian's wealthy political family had wired the entire wedding budget directly to the planners months in advance. But exactly 2 weeks before the ceremony, a massive withdrawal of exactly $23,000 had been authorized from the joint wedding account. My fingers flew across the keyboard, digging deeper into public blockchain ledgers tied to Chloe's known online alias. There it was, displayed in glaring red numbers, a catastrophic loss in a shady, unregulated cryptocurrency venture. Chloe had gambled away the venue money, desperate to hide her financial ruin from her new husband. My family had fabricated the corporate event, forging my credentials to make my employer cover the deficit. They had framed me to cover up her greed. If I submit this to accounting, I whispered into the phone, the grim reality of the situation crystallizing in my mind, I will be audited immediately. I will lose my emergency management license. I will be fired in disgrace. And because this involves crossing state lines with corporate funds, I will face a federal prison sentence. You are overreacting as usual, Vivian snapped, her tone turning venomous. You always make everything about yourself. Fix it, Caroline, or I swear to God, I will call your superiors myself and tell them you approved the event and are now trying to back out of your financial obligations. She thought she had me trapped in a corner. She assumed the obedient, sacrificial older sister would simply swallow the poison to keep the family image pristine. She thought the threat of my bosses would cow me into quiet submission. I stared at the glowing screen, glaring at the forged signature that possessed the power to end my entire life. The lingering, pathetic pain of that coastal rejection burned away, completely incinerated by a sudden, absolute clarity. The hurt was entirely gone. In its place, a ruthless, cold-blooded fury settled deeply into my veins. I will handle it, I said smoothly. I hung up the phone. I did not slam it down. I set it perfectly, quietly into its cradle. If they wanted a corporate partner event, I would gladly give them one. Only this time, I would be the one writing the final invoice. The ambient light of my apartment was entirely replaced by the harsh, sterile glare of 4 high-definition computer monitors. I had pushed my modern furniture against the walls, transforming my quiet living space into a heavily fortified war room. Sitting across from me at the glass dining table, completely surrounded by towering stacks of printed bank ledgers and server logs, was Marcus. He was a former federal financial investigator who had recently transitioned into private legal practice. Within my high-stakes corporate circle, Marcus was legendary for his surgical precision and an absolute lack of mercy when dismantling fraudulent entities. I had wired his retainer fee of $10,000 before the sun had even set on the day I discovered the forgery. "Show me the origin point," Marcus said, taking a slow, deliberate sip of his black coffee. His voice was gravelly, the sound of a man who had spent 3 decades dissecting the lies of white-collar criminals. I pulled up the raw metadata embedded deep within the forged contract submission. My career in emergency maritime logistics was fundamentally the science of tracking invisible moving parts in the dark. Finding a clumsy digital footprint was absolute child's play compared to locating a lost shipping container in the middle of a screaming typhoon. I ignored the standard email headers, which could be easily spoofed, and dug directly into the raw routing logs. Whoever had sent the fraudulent documents had attempted to mask their location using a free proxy server, but they had fundamentally misunderstood how session tokens functioned. Their digital disguise was embarrassingly fragile. It took me exactly 45 minutes of steady, rhythmic typing to strip away the false layers of code. A long string of identifying numbers populated on the center screen. I immediately ran the digits through a global geolocation protocol. A satellite image materialized, rapidly zooming in on a familiar residential grid. The system pinned a glowing red marker directly onto a sprawling 2-story house with a perfectly manicured front lawn in an affluent California neighborhood. It was the exact physical address of my parents' home. They had committed federal wire fraud using their own personal internet connection, sitting comfortably in their living room. "Amateurs," Marcus muttered, carefully writing the IP address down on his yellow legal pad. "This proves where the email came from, but any decent defense attorney will claim the network was hacked. We need more than a digital location. We need the physical voice, or better yet, a direct confession to tie the noose around their necks." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the satellite image of my childhood home. I knew exactly how to get the voice. The following morning, I bypassed standard customer service and dialed the direct office line of the financial manager at the luxury resort. When a man named David answered, I did not introduce myself as the frantic victim of identity theft. Instead, I utilized my most authoritative, high-level executive voice, utilizing the exact commanding tone I used when coordinating international Coast Guard fleet movements during an ocean crisis. David, this is Caroline Robertson, Director at Ethelgard Global. I am calling regarding the pending invoice for the Corporate Partner Appreciation event. I could hear the immediate, nervous shift in his posture through the receiver. He stammered slightly, intimidated by the corporate title. Yes, Ms. Robertson, we have been trying to reach your department all week. The payment is severely past due. I am well aware of the timeline, I replied smoothly, projecting an aura of absolute control. Our compliance department is finalizing the transfer as we speak, but we encountered a routine internal audit flag. This is standard corporate protocol for any external vendor payouts exceeding $20,000. I simply need to verify the verbal confirmation your office received regarding the contract terms. Our records indicate my assistant authorized the final approval over the phone. For strict internal compliance, I need the audio file of that specific phone call sent to my encrypted email within the next 10 minutes. If I do not receive it, I will be forced to freeze the entire payout pending a mandatory 90-day legal review. It was a calculated bluff built entirely on corporate anxiety. I knew perfectly well that resort managers lived in constant fear of delayed corporate payouts. David did not hesitate for a single second. Of course, Ms. Robertson, I understand completely. I will export the recording from our automated booking system and send it over right now. Exactly 8 minutes later, a compressed audio file arrived in my secure inbox. Marcus stood up and leaned over my shoulder as I hit the play button. A brief hiss of static echoed over my desktop speakers, followed immediately by the unmistakable, aristocratic drawl of my mother, Vivian. Yes, this is Caroline's executive assistant. Vivian's recorded voice filled my apartment, dripping with false professionalism. Ms. Robertson is currently tied up in an overseas conference, but she has instructed me to give full authorization for the $23,000 charge. You may process the contract under the Ethelgard corporate account. Marcus leaned back, a dark, satisfied smile spreading across his weathered face. Bingo, wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate impersonation, all perfectly wrapped up in a legally admissible audio file. But gathering the evidence was only half the battle. My family, entirely unaware that the trap was already closing around them, was not content with merely stealing from me. They needed to ensure my total submission. Over the next 72 hours, my personal cell phone became a relentless weapon of psychological warfare. The digital onslaught started with passive-aggressive guilt trips and rapidly escalated into outright terror tactics. My father, Arthur, began sending massive, hateful blocks of text messages at all hours of the night. You are a cold-blooded, miserable person. One message read, arriving at 2 o'clock in the morning. You have always been jealous of Chloe. She found a successful man who actually loves her, and you are trying to destroy her happiness over a minor accounting error. Pay the bill today, or you are no longer my daughter. When I did not respond to the emotional manipulation, the threats turned violently practical. I know exactly where your corporate headquarters is located. Arthur texted the following afternoon. If you do not wire the funds to the resort by Friday morning, I will drive up there and demand a face-to-face meeting with your senior vice president. I will tell them exactly how you treat your own flesh and blood. Let us see how long you keep your fancy director title after I expose your true character. A normal person would have blocked the numbers. A normal person would have silenced the constant notifications to protect their own mental health and find a moment of peace. I did exactly the opposite. I left every single channel of communication wide open. Every time my phone buzzed with a new threat, my pulse remained dead calm. I systematically took high-resolution screenshots of every single text message. I downloaded every frantic, demanding voicemail Vivian left on my machine. I categorized them meticulously by date, time, and level of criminal extortion. I backed up the files on 3 separate encrypted hard drives, handing copies over to Marcus to build the legal framework. My parents thought they were breaking my spirit. They thought they were wearing me down into the obedient, sacrificial workhorse I had always been. They did not realize that they were no longer dealing with a daughter desperately seeking their approval. They were dealing with an apex hunter. Every insult, every lie, and every desperate threat they hurled my way was meticulously catalogued. Each word they typed was just another iron nail being hammered into the coffin I was perfectly measuring for them. I knew the exact moment the psychological weight of my silence began to fracture their confidence. Bullies rely on immediate, chaotic reactions to maintain control. When you give them absolute silence, their imagination becomes their worst enemy. After 3 days of ignoring their escalating threats, it was time to deploy the bait. I sat at my glass dining table, Marcus quietly reviewing a stack of affidavits beside me, and opened a new email thread addressed to Vivian, Arthur, and Chloe. I kept my language deliberately meek, perfectly mimicking the defeated tone of a woman who had finally broken under the pressure. "You win," I typed, staring blankly at the cursor. "I cannot risk losing my career over this dispute. I will cover the invoice. However, the legal department at Ethelgard requires physical signatures from all involved parties to clear the corporate block. I need us all to sit down together to sign the final transfer papers. Julian must be present as well, considering the venue was technically booked under his family's name. Let us put this ugly chapter behind us." I hit send. Within 45 seconds, my phone screen lit up with a furious incoming call from Chloe. I watched her name flash, smiled coldly, and let it ring out into the silent apartment. I knew exactly what my sister was doing at that very moment. I could envision the sheer panic setting in. Having Julian in the same room as me, discussing a massive unpaid venue bill, was her absolute worst nightmare. It would instantly expose her catastrophic cryptocurrency losses and the fact that she had effectively robbed her new husband blind before they even exchanged vows. Later, I would learn the exact depth of her desperation. Chloe had burst into tears in their luxury penthouse, clinging to Julian and spinning a wild, frantic lie. She told him that the extreme stress of my demanding job had finally caused a severe psychiatric break. She painted me as an unstable, deeply jealous woman suffering from severe paranoid delusions, warning him that attending any meeting with me was not only pointless but potentially physically dangerous. But I was a logistics director. Anticipating catastrophic failures and building redundancies into the system was my profession. I never expected Chloe to willingly bring Julian to the slaughter. I had already bypassed her entirely. 24 hours before I sent that surrender email, I had prepared a special courier package. Inside a nondescript manila envelope rested a single sheet of high-grade paper. It was a photocopy of the forged $23,000 venue invoice, but I had not sent him the complete document. Using a heavy black marker, I had methodically redacted my forged signature, the Ethelgard corporate seals, and the specific names of the guarantors. The only things left visible were the name of the luxury resort, the exact date of his wedding reception, the massive outstanding balance, and the bold red stamp warning of impending federal litigation. I did not include a return address. I simply paid a private bonded courier to hand-deliver the sealed envelope directly to the private receptionist at Julian's downtown executive firm. Julian was a man bred in the ruthless ecosystem of generational wealth and high-stakes politics. You do not survive in that world by ignoring red flags. A massive, unpaid bill tied directly to his own heavily publicized wedding would be impossible for a man of his intellect to ignore. I was counting on his pride and his natural paranoia. 2 days passed. The tension in my apartment was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus had finalized the federal reporting documents, and everything was primed. Then, at exactly 9 o'clock on a Tuesday evening, my personal cell phone vibrated. The caller identification displayed an entirely unknown, out-of-state number. It was a classic burner phone. I answered, keeping my breathing perfectly steady. "Caroline speaking." The line was dead silent for 3 long seconds. Then, a low, controlled male voice spoke. "Someone dropped a very interesting puzzle on my desk yesterday. I have spent the last 48 hours trying to figure out why a five-star venue thinks I owe them money for an event my father fully funded 6 months ago. Good evening, Julian, I replied smoothly, leaning back into my chair. Chloe told me you were having a mental breakdown, Julian said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. She said you were hallucinating financial debts because you were bitterly jealous of our marriage. But crazy people do not send perfectly redacted, legally binding litigation threats via bonded courier. What exactly is going on? Caroline. Why is my wife terrified of you? I did not raise my voice. I did not launch into a furious tirade about my mother's cruelty or my father's extortion. Emotional outbursts would only make me look like the unstable woman Chloe claimed I was. Instead, I gave him exactly what a businessman understood: cold, hard data. I am not going to insult your intelligence by giving you my version of the story, I said quietly, the quiet hum of my computer servers providing a steady rhythm in the background. But I will give you a piece of advice. Before you come to the dinner meeting I arranged for this Friday, I highly suggest you bypass your shared marital accounts and initiate a hard audit on Chloe's private offshore holdings. Look specifically at the 2 weeks leading up to your wedding day. Look for a severe crypto liquidation. What did she do? Julian demanded, the polished veneer of the elite politician cracking just a fraction to reveal the dangerous man underneath. I merely have one question for you. Julian, I whispered, injecting a chilling sincerity into my tone. Are you absolutely sure you know the woman you call your wife? I ended the call immediately. I did not give him the chance to interrogate me further. The seed of absolute doubt had been planted in the most fertile soil imaginable. Over the next 48 hours, Julian unleashed his own private financial bloodhounds. He did exactly as I suggested, quietly auditing the massive sums of money his family had deposited for the wedding arrangements. It did not take his forensic accountants long to uncover the gaping black hole in the ledger. He found the missing $23,000. He found the disastrous, high-risk cryptocurrency trades Chloe had desperately tried to scrub from the internet. He found the panicked transfers, the bounced checks, and the absolute financial ruin she had secretly brought into his pristine family name. More importantly, he realized she had been lying to his face every single day since they stood at the altar. On Thursday evening, less than 24 hours before the scheduled family meeting, my phone rang again. It was the same burner number. I found it, Julian said. His voice was no longer just cold. It was dead, the sound of a man who had just watched his entire reality burn to ashes. She stole from my family to cover her gambling debts. And your new in-laws forged my corporate identity to cover her tracks, I replied, officially locking the final piece of the puzzle into place. They are attempting to frame me for federal fraud. Friday night, the French restaurant in San Francisco, Julian stated, his tone shifting from a betrayed husband into a ruthless ally. I will be there. And Caroline. Yes. Bring every single piece of evidence you have, he commanded softly. We are going to bury them. A shadow of a smile crossed my face in the quiet darkness of my command center. The trap was no longer just mine. I had officially recruited the executioner. The private dining room at an exclusive French restaurant in the heart of San Francisco smelled faintly of polished mahogany, expensive truffle oil, and old money. I sat perfectly still at the head of a massive dining table, my hands folded neatly over a leather briefcase resting on my lap. The heavy soundproof oak doors isolated the room entirely from the lively chatter of the main dining floor. The silence inside was absolute, heavy with the suffocating anticipation of a storm about to break. Promptly at 8 o'clock in the evening, the brass handle turned. Vivian and Arthur marched into the room, carrying themselves with the supreme arrogance of conquerors who believed they had successfully tamed a rebellious subordinate. Vivian wore a sharp, tailored crimson blazer, her chin tilted upward in an expression of victorious disdain. Arthur walked beside her, his chest puffed out, radiating the hollow authority of a patriarch who was used to getting his way through sheer volume and intimidation. Trailing slightly behind them was Chloe, She had expertly dressed for the part of the wounded victim. She wore a simple, understated beige dress, her hair pulled back modestly, her eyes intentionally downcast. She sniffled softly as she took her seat across from me, playing the role of the terrified, fragile younger sister to absolute perfection. Vivian did not bother with pleasantries. She did not ask how my drive was or offer to order a drink. She immediately reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a thick white envelope, and threw it aggressively across the polished wooden table. It slid to a halt, right in front of me. "There are the corporate authorization forms," Vivian commanded, her voice dripping with venomous impatience. "Sign on the dotted line. Caroline, transfer the $23,000 to the resort, and we can finally put this ridiculous tantrum of yours behind us. You have caused our family enough unnecessary stress this week." I looked down at the forged documents. I did not reach for the pen she had thoughtfully provided. I simply kept my hands folded, letting the silence stretch out, watching the second hand on my wristwatch sweep toward the designated time. "Did you hear your mother?" Arthur snapped, slamming his open palm against the table to make the silverware rattle. "Stop playing these childish games. Sign the paper right now so we can leave. We have a charity gala to attend in an hour, and I will not waste another minute looking at your ungrateful face." At exactly 8:15, before Arthur could draw another breath to yell, the heavy oak doors swung open. The temperature in the room seemed to drop below freezing in an instant. Chloe looked up, annoyed by the interruption, but the moment her eyes registered the two men stepping into the private dining room, all the color instantly vanished from her face. Her skin turned a sickly, translucent white. Her jaw went completely slack, and a low, involuntary gasp escaped her throat. Lawyer Marcus stepped in first, carrying a sleek black briefcase of his own, his eyes sweeping over my parents with the cold, detached gaze of a mortician examining a fresh corpse. Right behind him was Julian. Julian was dressed in a flawless charcoal suit, but there was nothing polished about his demeanor tonight. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle twitched near his temple, and his eyes burned with a quiet, homicidal fury as he stared directly at his newlywed wife. "Julian," Vivian stammered, her smug expression shattering into utter confusion. She looked frantically between me and her son-in-law. "What are you doing here? Chloe said you were out of town on business." I finally moved. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or gloat. The time for emotion was long gone. With slow, methodical precision, I opened the brass latches of my leather briefcase. "Julian is here because his family's name is on the venue contract," I said smoothly, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "And Marcus is here because he is my legal counsel. You wanted a formal signing, Mother. So, let us review the documents." I pulled out the first neatly bound folder and slid it across the table toward Arthur. "Exhibit A," I announced clinically, the raw routing logs and digital footprints proving that the forged corporate email was sent directly from the router located in your living room. You did not even use a virtual private network. My 10-year-old nephew could have traced it. Vivian swallowed hard, her crimson blazer suddenly looking far too tight around her neck. I pulled out the second item, a small silver flash drive, and placed it perfectly in the center of the table. Exhibit B, a high-definition audio recording provided by the financial manager of the resort. It features you, Mother, explicitly impersonating my executive assistant to authorize the fraudulent charge under my corporate seal. Arthur's face flushed a dangerous, violent shade of purple. He shot up from his chair, pointing a trembling finger at me. "How dare you? You illegally recorded your own mother. I am your father, and I will not sit here and let you disrespect this family. I will ruin you. Caroline." "Sit down, Arthur." Julian's voice cracked through the room like a physical whip. Arthur froze. He looked at Julian, entirely unaccustomed to being spoken to with such absolute, commanding authority. Julian did not even blink. He stepped forward, reached into his tailored jacket, and threw a thick, legally bound stack of papers directly in front of Chloe. Chloe flinched violently as the papers hit the wood. She began to sob, her hands shaking as she looked at the bold black letters printed on the front page. They were absolute, unconditional divorce proceedings. You stole $23,000 from my family to cover your crypto gambling debts, Julian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal whisper. You lied to my face every single day, and then you and your parents conspired to commit federal fraud to hide your mess. You will sign those divorce papers tonight. You will waive all rights to alimony, and your family will return every single cent of the stolen wedding budget to my accounts by Monday morning. If you attempt to fight me on this, I will let my family's legal team grind you into absolute dust. The reality of the trap finally closed around them. There was no escape. No manipulation or gaslighting could save them from the hard, unforgiving concrete of the evidence laid out on the table. Vivian's legs gave out. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch who had locked me out of the cliffside mansion completely collapsed. She fell to her knees right there on the expensive carpet. Tears streamed down her meticulously applied makeup, ruining her pristine image. She grabbed the edge of the table, looking up at me with wide, panicked eyes. Caroline, please, Vivian sobbed, her voice cracking in raw desperation. Please, you cannot do this to us. We will go to prison. Arthur will lose his business. Chloe will be ruined. We are your family. You are my daughter. Please, have some mercy on your own blood. For the first time since that freezing afternoon on the California coast, I smiled. It was not a smile of joy, but a cold, hollow expression of absolute finality. I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet and felt absolutely nothing. At the mansion gates that day, you looked me in the eye and said I was not family. I replied softly, my words cutting through her sobs like a scalpel. You said I was a blemish. I am simply following your exact instructions. I stood up from my chair and buttoned my jacket. I picked up the final folder from my briefcase, the one containing the drafted federal indictment. This is not a negotiation, I stated, delivering the final, crushing blow. You have exactly 48 hours to auction off Arthur's prized antique painting collection. You will use those funds to pay the resort in full. You will also transfer an additional $50,000 to my personal account to cover my legal fees and the reputational damage you attempted to inflict on my career. If the funds are not cleared by Monday at noon, Marcus will hand-deliver this entire package to the regional office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Have a wonderful evening. 6 months have passed since I walked out of that private dining room in San Francisco, leaving the remnants of my toxic bloodline behind. True to my deadline, Arthur liquidated his prized art collection before the 48 hours expired, to avoid federal prison and Julian's relentless legal wrath. My parents were forced to sell the beautiful childhood home in the affluent suburbs. Marcus informed me that they relocated to a cramped, run-down apartment complex just to survive the financial ruin. Chloe's marriage, built entirely on a foundation of devastating lies, shattered completely. Julian finalized the divorce rapidly, severing all ties and leaving her with absolutely nothing. I did not stay to watch their downfall. The exact moment the settlement funds cleared into my bank account, I completely erased them from my existence. I changed my personal phone number and permanently deleted all my old social media profiles. Any handwritten letters that managed to find their way to my office desk, begging for a second chance or tearfully apologizing, went directly into the corporate paper shredder unopened. I had finally learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, forgiveness is not a virtue. It is merely an open invitation for toxic people to return and finish the job. Free from the suffocating anchor of my family's constant demands, my career skyrocketed. The senior executives at Ethelgard took notice of how ruthlessly and efficiently I handled the attempted corporate fraud. Within 3 months, I was promoted to the global head of crisis operations. The new title came with the ultimate freedom to relocate. I left California behind and bought a massive, sun-drenched loft in Seattle. The space is entirely mine. I even adopted a scruffy golden rescue dog named Boomer, who spends his days aggressively defending the couch cushions and reminding me what unconditional love actually looks like. It is early morning now, A cool, gray mist rolls in from the Puget Sound. I sit on my wooden balcony, wrapping my hands around a steaming mug of black coffee. In the distance, the deep, resonant blast of a cargo ship's horn echoes through the heavy fog. The air is so incredibly quiet. There are no frantic phone calls demanding my money. There are no guilt trips, no threats, and absolutely no iron gates slammed in my face. There is only the pure, absolute stillness of a woman who finally took back the master key to her own life. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Maya Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.